everyone. Welcome to WonderCon at Home 2021 and today's panel, which is Romance and Dark Fantasy. My name is Tanaz Bhathena, and I'll be moderating the panel today. I write contemporary and fantasy novels for young adults. My most recent book, which came out last year, is Hunted by the Sky, a dark fantasy romance set in a world inspired by medieval India. The story revolves around a girl prophesied to be the downfall of a tyrant king and a boy whose fate is inexplicably tied to hers. The book's sequel, Rising Like a Storm, releases on June 22nd of this year. Today, I'll be talking to three brilliant YA authors who've also written dark fantasies with richly imagined worlds and fascinating, messy relationships. I'm going to let them introduce themselves and their books, starting with Alexandra.
Oh, I'm first. Hi, my name is Alexandra Christo, and I'm the author of To Kill a Kingdom and Into the Crooked Place, which is about a group of black magic dealers who have to save the world rather than destroy it for once when they discover that their criminal leader, the Kingpin, has developed a new kind of magic that crosses the line even for them. And the sequel, City of Spells, comes out in March this year. Oh, that was it.
Anyone else can jump in.
Sure, I'll go. My name's Adalyn Grace. I'm the author of All the Stars and Teeth and All the Tides of Fate, which is released this February. It is a fantasy series about a morally gray princess who's forced to team up with a rather mysterious pirate to save her kingdom from a dangerous magical new threat. It has 7 different forms of magic, mermaids who may or may not like to eat people, and it's one big seafaring adventure.
Right, I guess it's me. Hi, I'm Szabo. I'm the author of What Big Teeth, which just came out this February, which is about a girl who returns home to her mysterious family after a long stint at boarding school. And in order to try and untangle their complicated past, she has to team up with her family's mysterious family friend who may or may not be more sinister than he seems in his intentions.
I love all those introductions, and I actually love all these books. I've been thoroughly enjoying them over the weekend. And I'm always interested in origin stories. So I would like to know what brought you into fantasy in the first place. Was there any specific influence, like a book, movie, TV show, or folklore? Something that was your gateway into this genre? And anyone can feel free to jump in.
I mean, I can go. So for me, it started with my debut, To Kill a Kingdom, which is an evil fairy tale reimagining of The Little Mermaid. So for me, it was very much fairy tales that brought me into fantasy. And when I was growing up, fairy tales were always kind of centered around a woman who needed to be saved and who wasn't in control of her own destiny. So I originally wanted to write fantasy, to write about women taking charge of their destinies and women who were the ones that people needed saving from rather than being saved by. So that was kind of what got me into the stories, writing these fantasies where women were in charge of their own stories and they weren't just victims of their stories.
Yeah, Rose, do you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah, so I think a big influence for me was Diane Duane's The Young Wizard series. So my book is very much like a reimagining of what monsters are, like what werewolves are and what witches are. And she did a similar thing in her universe where she reconceptualizes magic as like a complex modern science, essentially, where wizards are constantly fighting against entropy. And I think reading her books at a very early age made me really aware that there's all of this possibility for sort of playing with the canon understanding of what things are, and that's where like really great stuff happens in fantasy, like when you start deconstructing the like Tolkien universe tropes.
Yeah, I think I started actually in anime. Like I wasn't like a huge, as far as I remember, I wasn't a huge reader when I was a kid. I kind of started with anime and then writing. I fell into writing on a website that used to exist called Neopets.
Yeah.
On the Neopets like guilds and the role-playing boards. I wasn't a big reader until then, but fantasy, I guess, just kind of came to me naturally. Like I grew up on Pokemon and Sailor Moon and, not really even considering that these magical quests and adventures don't exist. And then kind of when I got older, I was like, oh, this is really disappointing. Like I don't get to go on a big epic fantasy adventure with my friends. I guess I have to write them.
Yeah.
Don't we all? Don't we all? We all have to write our own adventures, right? I mean, all of this is so interesting to hear. For myself, I remember loving fantasy as a child. R.L. Stein was a huge influence on me back then. I just loved werewolves, witches, and vampires. And I also watched a lot of TV shows based on Indian mythology and history. But when it came to writing my own stories, I default to the books that I read, and those were often by Western fantasy authors. I would imitate these authors, not knowing why my stories never seemed to work out. And it wasn't until many years later, after I finished writing my first book, which was a contemporary, that I thought, I want to try something different. So let me try writing a science fiction dystopia, which really, really was bad. And then I ended up, I just love the characters in that book. I just love the chemistry between them. So I was like, you know what? I want to turn it into a fantasy. So that's what I did. And I changed the setting to one inspired by medieval India, a historical period that I was obsessed with as a teenager. And as I began rewriting the book, everything began falling into place. Suddenly, this whole world was opening up before me, full of dangerous labyrinthine palaces, different kinds of magic, hybrid human animal beings who were inspired by Hindu and Zoroastrian mythology, stories that I grew up listening to. And that brings me to my next question. All of you have very unique, distinct worlds in your books, from buskers and gangsters and this magical underworld in Alexandra's series to pirates, mermaids, and curse magic and Adalyn's, to Rose's book, which has this beautiful gothic atmosphere, monstrous family members, and werewolves. So you also have a lot of strong female protagonists with super interesting backstories. So I'm curious what came first for you. Was it the characters or the world itself? What was the process like when you were writing?
I guess I could start. Yeah, for me, it was very much the main character came first, which is very abnormal for me. Normally, I think of like the world or like a basic plot first. But I was super big into Game of Thrones when it was airing, and I really hated the debate that was going on between Arya and Sansa Stark and how they were pitted against each other and like, oh, who is cooler? Like Arya's cooler because she has swords, and Sansa's lame because she likes boys and court and dating and everything. And that like made me so annoyed and so just upset that Sansa was just so considered just so lowly because Arya liked Mr. Pointy. And I really wanted just a character who was kind of both of those things. Who, she likes dating, she likes adventure, she likes sword fights, but she also likes pretty dresses and gowns and court intrigue and everything. So I came up with Amora first, and I knew literally nothing about the world until I started writing it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same. I actually normally always start with character first. I normally just have a person pop into my head, and then I will write a chapter in their point of view, and then I will build the world around them. So in Into the Crooked Place, Tavia, one of my main female protagonists, is the one that came into my head first. And she was someone who was on the street selling magic, and she had different magic that she sold at different times, and she was very untrusting of anyone. And I just thought, what kind of a world would she live in? What kind of a city would she live in? What kind of a place would this person belong to? And I kind of just built the world around her. And that's what I tend to do with all of my books, because to me, I feel like characters are always the most interesting part of a story, right? Like I always say, you can have an amazing, amazing plot, but if your character kind of falls flat, nobody's going to really care about it. Whereas if you have this really well layered and realistic character, people are going to care about the story because they're going to care about like how that affects them. So that's kind of where I always tend to start, which I hope has worked out quite well. But for this book, it was quite hard because there were like 4 main characters, so I had to build the story around so many different points of view.
It worked out really well.
Thank you.
Rose, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah. So I also start very much with characters almost always. For What Big Teeth, I actually drew out pictures of all of the family members before I ever conceptualized this as a novel. So there's this like very amateurish piece of art hanging in my house that's like all of the little portraits of all the characters. But I actually didn't think that the story was going to be from the perspective of my main character, Eleanor, at first. I was conceiving of this as like this big ensemble cast, which was like this scary family and all of the things that they had done that had gotten to them to where they are now. And I didn't really like Eleanor. She was like in the top left corner, sort of away from everybody else, looking at everyone else really suspiciously. And I was like, why can't this person just, like enjoy her cool family? And I think that's where a lot of the story came from for me, is like this tension that I felt with this character, who I eventually came to really like and really understand, because I figured out why she didn't like her family very much. But to me, like world and character are very much the same thing. Like if the world is believable, then the characters' conflicts and motivations feel real. And if the characters are real, it's because they're rooted in the world.
I love all of these answers, and definitely all of you have really integrated your characters into these worlds, because they're so essential when it comes to making a story more interesting, because not only are they windows into these elaborate fantasy worlds, but with characters also come complex history and messy relationships. And since this is a panel about romance, I'm curious, when you started your books, did you even know there would be a romance or romances going in? Or did your character surprise you at some point and say, hey, you know what? This other character is kind of cute. I want to go out with them, or whatever.
I can take this one. So I knew right away that there was going to be a romance between these two characters, because I was sort of like I could see that Eleanor was very like drawn to this one other character in my story. But I don't think I realized exactly what it was about them that connected them at first. This book took like 10 years to write, I'll be honest. And so when I was initially conceiving of this book, I wasn't thinking about Eleanor, my protagonist, as being queer. And I only through sort of like repeated drafts did it like emerge to me that part of what was drawing these two characters together was their relationship to queerness. So that was interesting.
I go next. Yeah, my book, all of my books I knew. I'm one of the kind of readers that I always love a bit of romance in every book I read, even if it's not the central plot. I always love those little hints of it, those kind of staring at each other from across the room while people are dying in a huge war. I just love it. So I always include that in my books, and I feel like it really helps you explore other parts of the characters and helps you get to know them better because you see them through the eyes of someone else. So yeah, when I started this book, I always knew that there was going to be a bit of a romance between Tavia and her underboss Wesley. And I knew I wanted to kind of be an enemies to lovers romance. And I knew I wanted a romance between Saxony and Karam. And I wanted that to be a bit more of a stable and healthy relationship. And I wanted to show all these different dynamics between the characters, friendships and love, and then learning to trust each other, all set against a backdrop of the world ending, because I found that that was a really interesting way to explore their emotions and how they felt about each other, and to help them grow a little bit, because God knows they need it.
Yeah, I think I always knew. I mean, if I'm going to have a pirate in a story, I feel like I kind of want to, have a little bit of fun with that. And I feel like the main character, her name is Amora, and she's very drawn to adventure. She's very drawn to, what is out there in the world, and like, let's discover that. And that is very much like what Bastion, the pirate, is also into. And I feel like they really can just relate. They have like that travel instinct in their blood and just really connect on that level. So yeah, there was never a world in which they were not going to be kissing.
And that's the best part of the book, right? When they kiss, just as everything's in a way, a big battle comes, as a big kiss.
I mean, I love reading books that have kissing and killing in equal measures. So, I knew going in that there would be a romance in Hunted by the Sky as well. That said, I did not realize how central the love story would become to the main plot. And I guess that was the biggest challenge for me going in. I had to figure out how various aspects of the romance would actually fit into the world's magic system. And I was wondering if you all faced something similar or different. What for you was the easiest or the most challenging part of integrating romance into dark fantasy?
I think for me, it was trying to balance all the kissing and the killing, trying to make it so that it's not just a book with a romance, or it's not just a fantasy action. It's all of those things combined, and kind of balancing those stares across the room with the plotting and the planning and the world literally ending. And I think that is quite a delicate balance. And you have to make sure that the characters are still focused on their goals while also being focused on who's the best looking in the room and who's got the nicest smirk. So yeah, it was all for me, it was quite hard to strike that balance, like you said, and to make sure that I kept the tension. I didn't rush into it, because in my head as I'm writing, I'm like, I really want them to kiss. And then my kind of writer brain is like, no, come on, build up the tension. There's bigger things going on in the world. So I kind of had to just fight against myself to not put the kiss in like chapter 1.
You sound like a girl after my own heart,
Yeah.
Alexandra.
Yeah, I feel like for me, so the world in All the Stars and Teeth is very gritty. It's very dark, and the main character has a very dark power. Her magic is the most dangerous, the darkest magic in the entire book. And it's pretty gruesome. Like when she's using it, it's straight up gruesome. So just balancing, I guess, with that, like, okay, well, when can they kiss? Because I don't want her to feel like a serial killer. I don't want them to be like, you know, having romantic moments where she's literally like drenched in the blood of her enemies. So building that into, I mean, you could be into it. I feel like it kind of maybe a different sort of book, a little bit of a different book. But just like finding that right balance between that and, you know, the plot too, and this giant world, because I did myself a disservice of making 7 different islands. So you have a lot of world building in a book like that. So just finding the right time to really build up, you know, the tension, and when do they kiss? Like Alexandra was saying, like it takes a lot of thought.
Yeah. I mean, I feel similarly. I feel like balancing, like to what Alexandra was saying, balancing like the romance with sort of the A plot, because for me, those are very closely intertwined. And sort of navigating the personal dynamic of like, does this person love me? Do they hate me? Do they want to kill me? Are we friends? You know, that's like the exciting part to me of like writing, is like these like gritty interpersonal dynamics. And for me, there was also like my main character, Eleanor, isn't a werewolf like the rest of her family, because she actually has a more sort of dark and insidious power, which becomes obvious as the book goes on. And that power means that it's not always clear if people are doing what she wants them to do because they want to, or because she wants them to. And so trying to have my characters figure out this romance with this backdrop of, you know, a sinister and deadly power was it was hard, but it was also like the most fun part of the writing, I think.
I think that's fun. Yeah, I think that's fun for like a reader too, the part where it's like, oh, are they going to kill me or are we going to kiss? Like that's what we get to play with in dark fantasy, and it's so much fun. I love that you mentioned that.
It's like such extremes, isn't it? Then in the real world, it's like, no, it's either one or the other. And you have to be a lot more subtle about it, right? Like characters in fantasy never just say to each other, oh, I really like you. They always say, oh, I want to stab you. And then you're like, right, they like each other. We know now. We know.
Or like, I love you, but what about the nation?
Oh, yeah, well, true. What
Bigger
about the
things
world?
are always at stake, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And like I really love all these answers. I feel like I should let you guys just continue talking. It's just so much fun listening to you. Now, in general, I'm a huge fan of tropes, and I remember being very tempted to include a love triangle in my series, but I was talked out of it by my editors, probably for a good reason. And that said, I still love the conflict that a love triangle or a love square or any other geometric love shape creates, even though it may not be everyone else's cup of tea. So I want to know, what's your favorite controversial or unpopular romance trope, and why?
I'll die on this hill. Love triangles for sure. When I feel like they get such a bad reputation, but it's like there are many, many, many bad love triangles. But when you find a good one that can like seriously pit people against each other, and like even you as the reader are like kind of conflicted, like, oh, I can see why they're interested in this person. I can see why they're interested in this person. I don't know who to vote for, but this one I think is cuter, so I'm gonna vote for them. Like when you have a good love triangle, I would highly recommend, if anybody knows True Beauty, there's a K-drama and a webtoon of it, and it has such a good love triangle. So that for sure, I think it's such a bad reputation, but it's so good.
See, I don't dislike love triangles, but I don't ever read them because I get too conflicted. And I'm like, I don't like that I like both people. I'm like, I need a clear person to root for, and that needs to be my person. Otherwise, I'm just like, I can't concentrate. So I don't dislike love triangles at all. And I think they can be really well done. But I'm always like, once I pick a person, I'm like, that's my dude. Even if he ends up destroying the world, I'm like, no, you were here first. You're my guy. Definitely my guy. So I think love triangles are great. One thing that it's not even controversial. I just really, really like enemies to lovers romance, but I think that's a really popular trope. But I think it's a trope for a reason, right? These are tropes because people do love them, and you love like having that tension of people who have that witty banter, and every time you say something, there's like a comeback straight away, and you have that tension, and then they slowly learn to bring their walls down. They slowly learn to trust that person, and maybe only that person. They're vulnerable with only that person. And I just love that idea of two kind of badasses, two anti-heroes learning to love each other and love themselves as well.
Oh man, I feel like love triangles and enemies to lovers it's like the catnip of dark fantasy, like those two things. I think my book might have like a love hexagon, septagon in it. It gets complicated.
That's fun though. That's super fun.
But yeah, I have a soft spot for like love triangles that turn into like more complicated dynamics, or like when it, when they like get it sorted out successfully. That's very satisfying. But yeah, enemies to lovers for sure. We've talked about this, but there's really something about like the tension of like, what are we to each other? Can we even trust each other at all? That just like makes it all the more gratifying when they do manage to successfully kiss without stabbing each other just once.
Yeah. And it's the thing, right? These are things that like in real life, we probably wouldn't be in support of. Like someone you hate, probably don't date them. Or if there's like, if someone can't decide between you and another girl or another boy or another person, don't date them. Like, but in fantasy, we're like, do it.
It's like catnip. Yeah, I like forbidden romance
too. You can have such good reasons.
Yeah, and it's like, it's fine. It's fantasy. Anything goes. Literally anything.
And that's the point of fantasy, right? It's like, oh my goodness, yes, let them kill each other, but let them kiss each other as well. And speaking of dark fantasy, does a romance need a happily ever after? If it is dark fantasy, why or why not? And by the way, this question comes to you from a person whose first book was a dark contemporary where I killed both of my characters on page 1. So feel free to jump in.
You are evil. You're more evil than all of us. I think if a book is like strictly romance, you should have a happy ending. Like, I feel like that's kind of a thing of romance. That's what it's all about, right? The happily ever after. But if it's a story with romance in it, I think that's a whole different ballgame. There's a whole different set of rules. So I don't think those necessarily need to have a happy ending. I like happy endings, but I don't think that's necessarily, especially in dark fantasy, and especially if you're writing a series, you kind of want those dark moments, those down moments, and you kind of want a more gritty, realistic portrayal of love in some circumstances. So yeah, I think it depends on if romance is the central plot or not. But I think in fantasy, anything goes, really.
Yeah, the only thing I don't like is when I don't have answers. Oh, I'm sorry, Rose. Like, I just like a story that, we kind of have an idea of what is happening to the characters in the romance towards the end. Like, are they or aren't they? That is like my one thing. But I kind of like bittersweet endings too. Like, it doesn't have to be all rainbows and butterflies for me. It can be, real life is a little bit gritty, and I kind of like my endings a little bit gritty too.
Yeah, so it's wrapped up in a bow, but it's not necessarily a really pretty, neat bow.
Yeah, it's like a charade bow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like looking at this question earlier, and I had to go like look up a quote because I was like, I remembered Hayao Miyazaki saying something about how he would rather see two characters like love each other in this way where they like inspire each other to live, is what he said. And I feel like that is a happy ending. So like I'm always very interested in endings where the characters don't necessarily get a traditional happy ever after, but they like their love comes to some sort of successful resolution. even if that's just, we're happy for now, or, you know, I haven't killed you yet.
Yet being the key word.
It looks like I'm the only
I feel
evil
like
person here.
the ending of the movie Hannibal, where instead of like cutting off Clarice's hand, he cuts off his own hand, and then like it's like, oh, he'll be back. I thought that was weirdly romantic.
That's why we write what we do.
That's why we love dark fantasy,
Yeah.
right? I think it also takes a great deal of courage on an author's part to write a dark ending for a very dark story, because if not done well, you'll end up having your readers disappointed, or they'll simply say, thank God they both died, instead of being heartbroken.
Yeah, I think it has to be done because it makes sense to the story, right? Like, as long as you're doing it not just to be controversial or for like a big bam surprise effect, like if you're doing it, if it makes sense to the story and it makes sense to the character's journey and it feels organic, then I think that's fine, because at the end of the day, it's the character's journey that makes the most sense and that everyone's there for.
I totally agree. I mean, it's very rare that I've come across a book that does it well. I just came across one recently, Soul Swift by Megan Bannon. It's a dark fantasy with a dark ending, but that book ripped my heart out and I loved it. It was just amazing. It was so well done. That said, what would you like to see more of in fantasy romance, or even fantasy in general when it comes to YA?
What would I like to see more of? I don't know if I have a strict answer to that, to be honest. I feel like there's always more to see in any genre, in fantasy and anything. There's always new stories to be uncovered and new characters and new stories to be told. So I feel like anything, it's limitless what I'd like to see. I think maybe I'd like to see more standalone fantasies, even as someone who wrote a series myself, but I do like the thought of more fantasies, because a lot of fantasies, it is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 100 books. It's sometimes nice to have a fantasy that is just one book, one adventure, one kind of world all wrapped up. So I feel like standalone fantasies are always have a little bit of magic in them. So yeah, more standalones, I think.
I guess I'm kind of working on something I'd like to see more of, which is, I mean, I grew up loving paranormal romance, paranormal fantasy, and just kind of the descent into darkness, like a forbidden romance. So I'm working on a book where the romantic lead is Death himself. And I feel like I just like that, like, I love that dark grittiness, like, oh, well, I'm not supposed to be like into this, but like this is Death. I feel like that's just so much fun to get to read about and to get to like write about and like be in that kind of world and that romance.
It almost reminds me of like old school vampire romances.
Yeah, just like that, that dark descent.
In fact, like that's on trend again with vampires. I'm like, oh, yes, teenage me is like, thank you.
I know.
Oh yeah, absolutely. More like gritty, destructive stuff. I've been really excited to maybe check out like Gideon the Ninth and Harrow the Ninth, because that sounds like it promises to be that like really entangled, you know, messy relationship. I was thinking, I don't see like a lot of like disabled characters in YA fantasy romance, and if anybody like watching this panel later is like, oh, I have a recommendation for you, like please send it to me on Twitter or something.
I do think,
and also like, sorry, go ahead, please.
I think A Curse So Dark and Lonely features a character with a disability.
I'm getting out a pencil.
That's like off the top of my head, the first one I can think of, but I will also have a Google and send you an email, because I'm sure there's more on my Goodreads, but I know that one off the top of my head. But yeah, totally agree. They can do so many more.
Yeah, definitely more diverse YA isn't definitely. Go ahead, Rose. Sorry for interrupting.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, like, you know, I've been seeing like more like, you know, diverse YA across the board, but I feel like fantasy romance is like this sphere where I haven't seen that that particular dynamic play out.
Yeah, I think it just
and then also like more trans characters.
I feel like especially in fantasy, because that's something that in YA is becoming slightly more like more common, but in fantasy I feel like fantasy is lagging behind a little bit in that area.
Yeah, I've seen like a lot of really cool titles like in the last year that are like YA romance featuring trans characters, but like a lot of them take place in like sort of a contemporary world. Like I'm really excited for May the Best Man Win. I don't know if you guys have heard about that one, but it's like a trans guy and his ex-boyfriend from before he transitioned, both running for prom king, and it's like very
Ooh, okay.
right. That sounds really good, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like, what if they were elves? That's all I'm saying.
That's my catnip.
Right, we know what your next book's going to be.
Oh yeah.
So funny that all the fantasy creatures. I don't feel like I hear elves a lot.
And I just wanted to know, what books would you recommend for people who loved your fantasies?
Yeah, Fable by Adrian Young. I feel like for anybody who likes mine, because it's very much like in a seafaring world, kind of like a dark, gritty world. Adrian Young's Fable is a duology, and I would definitely recommend that one for anyone who enjoys that.
Yeah, for me, for my debut To Kill a Kingdom, it's very much a mermaid and siren book, so I was going to recommend Adalyn.
Hey, thanks.
Pirates, mermaids, and for Into the Crooked Place and City of Spells, I think Ace of Shades by Amanda Foody is such a good one, and I like drew a lot of inspiration from that one, kind of the gangsters and with their bow ties and that kind of almost like mafia Vegas style world. So definitely recommend that.
I feel like for mine, I would recommend A Dowry of Blood, which just came out from S.T. Gibson, which is, if you like messed up family dynamics and also monsters, like that's your book. And maybe also Anno Dracula, which is like a little bit older, but it's focused on what if Dracula killed Van Helsing, married Queen Victoria, and turned England into like vampire kingdom.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
And that has a lot of, that's like a lot of like overlapping like romances and plot lines and like a huge ensemble cast. So like if you like ensembles, that's maybe for you.
What's the title again?
Anno Dracula, like Anno Domini, but with Dracula instead.
I'm going to have to look that one up. It sounds awesome. In terms of Hunted by the Sky, if you love reading your fantasy with Indian settings, then definitely Empire of Sand by Tasha Suri. Literally anything by Tasha Suri is amazing. The Tiger at Midnight trilogy by Swati Teerdhala. And I recently read an arc of Sisters of the Snake by twin authors, Serena and Sasha Nanwa. And that's a new book coming out this June. And I definitely recommend that one as well. And I think we have reached the end of our panel today. Thank you so much, Alexandra, Adalyn, and Rose. I thoroughly enjoyed talking to you all, and I hope the audience at home enjoyed our conversation as well. You can buy our books online from most retailers or get them at your local library. Thank you, WonderCon, for hosting us today. And as we sign off, we'll also let readers know where they can find us online. I'll go first. You can find me at my website, tanazbhathena.com, or on Instagram at Bhathena Tanaz.
And you can find me on my website, alexandrachristo.com, or on Instagram, Alexandra Christo Writes, or on Twitter at Ali Christo.
I'm mostly on Instagram. You can find me at author Adalyn Grace, and I have a website too. I think it's actually backwards, Adalyn Grace author, because I couldn't get the address.
And you can find me on roseszabo.com where, there's links to all of my other stuff like Twitter and Instagram and, chapters of the book and stuff like that.
Awesome. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thank you.